What is the United States ready to offer to Egypt in terms of energy and better to improve their abilities to deal with energy issues?
Well, first, over the last couple of years, we have discussed different ways of approaching the real power crisis that existed in Egypt for the last several years, and looking and learning from our experience and expertise that we've developed to share that, to discuss what are the ways that you can look at the myriad of options that Egypt faced at a difficult moment. Mm-hmm. Like Egypt, the United States, we are both producers of oil, producers of gas. We're going to start exporting gas soon. We will join Egypt, who's been doing it for far longer than we have. But we also still import quite a bit. We're also trying to diversify our own mix. We're trying to bring on renewable energy into the U.S. power mix. Mm-hmm. Egypt has set a goal of 20% over the next several years to reach renewable energy as well. Interconnecting with your neighbors. We do the same on all these fronts. So to look at what have we learned, what can we share from what we've learned, that kind of expertise. We also have American companies who are quite interested and intrigued by coming to look at investing further. The success of this past year to reach this summer was in no small part not only because of our cooperation, it was mostly because of the work done by the government, but without a doubt the contribution by companies such as GE and others from Europe and elsewhere contributed to being able to make that happen, to realize that goal. So I think we have, from the expertise side, the technical assistance, as well as encouraging our companies to come and continue the investment here.
The Egyptian president was speaking about GE's contribution during the Economic Forum in March. Mm-hmm. So is this going further, or something has changed in the plans of American companies, like now their eyes are set on Iran?
Oh, well, I think that first, the sanctions on Iran for American companies are not being removed. Our embargo is staying in place. Mm-hmm. So American companies are surely not setting their eyes on Iran, and they should not if they are. Mm-hmm. No time soon. And when it comes to Egypt, I think that there is, if you think about where Egypt was just a couple of years ago compared to today, I think there's a lot of reasons for corporations, American companies, to look at Egypt positively because real reform was done here. There's been real change, and it's not only the political aspects of what's happening in Egypt or the security. It's the real everyday reality of what a company faces when it comes here. There is a realization of putting in place incentives, changing pricing structures, changing the mechanisms for investment that I think are bearing fruit. And you've seen new announcements in the energy sector of companies investing. Some of these are the first new investments in the energy sector here in many, many years. Mm-hmm. So I think for that reason, American companies can and should look at Egypt as a positive place for new investment.
Are you lobbying for the Paris summits? I mean, in order to get people on board to work on the climate change?
So the way we divide it, first of all, as you know, that's a very important goal for the United States. We want to see a strong COP21 summit in Paris, mm-hmm. Where the global community comes together and makes a clear statement on climate change goals. What I'm focusing on, we have different people looking at these issues, and Secretary Kerry and President Obama are personally engaged in this effort. I'm looking also at how do we move beyond post-Paris into the implementation. Mm-hmm. Because beyond setting just the goals mm-hmm. and the targets, we have to look at how do we work together to...
Because this is what happened in COP20 in Lima.
Exactly.
Just the goals.
So we have to look at integration of renewables and how do you bring that about so that you're not just focusing on goals every few years, but looking at real implementation, bringing about the integration of renewable energy as a larger part of the mix. If Egypt's leadership is setting 20% as a goal of renewable energy, that's something that we would like to be helpful in seeing how can you make that a reality. Mm-hmm. So that's exactly the kind of conversation we would like to have. Two different levels. One is what's happening today. How do we change the reality on the street, in the homes, in the businesses for every Egyptian? Mm-hmm. But then also not forgetting that part of our responsibility collectively is making sure that Egyptian children grow up in a cleaner and more sustainable environment. And so that's not just about this year or next year. It's about bringing on the kind of investment and targeting in decades to come. But it has to start today.
But isn't it expensive to depend on all these sources of renewable energy? It's not as expensive as it was 10 years ago, but still it is quite expensive for the time to be.
You know, if you open the newspaper on a daily basis, on the Financial Times, the New York Times, the London Times, you will find story after story about oil prices are 50% down, natural gas prices are 2/3 down. What you don't see is that solar and wind are down almost 80% over the last several years.
But still remains, when you build an infrastructure, especially if you don't want to use it for domestic purposes, but you want to use it for industry and so on, it just becomes very expensive.
But once you make that investment, once you incentivize the private sector to invest there, those are renewable resources. Those are resources that are not going away. And the dividend is not only in the fact that you're getting a much more affordable resource today than it's ever been, but it pays dividends for years to come when you are cleaning that environment, when you are having a cleaner air, when your medical bills for your people are lower, when you take care of some of the side effects. Look at what's happening in certain countries where pollution was so bad that it finally became a political issue where people just rose up and said, I can barely see across the street. I don't want to wear a mask while I'm walking on the street. I want to be, so I dividend to pay there. But I think the leadership here understands that, and it's trying to balance between what is affordable, how to attract the business side, and also invest in the renewable.
When were you in Greece last time?
A couple months ago.
How did that go?
It's an interesting times. I think Greece has an opportunity to play a critical role as one of the bridges into Eastern Central Europe, as to help them achieve the kind of energy security that region lacks so terribly. And that's a great potential, I think, that Greece can play as part of the solution for energy security in Europe.
And they've got two options, one which is supported by the United States, one which is not supported by the United States. As far as I have read in many reports, that you were trying to push for the one favored by America rather than the one favored by Russia. How did that go?
I would probably phrase it a bit differently. I would say that it's not that one is favored by the U.S. and one is not. There are options that will provide energy security for Europe, and there are options that will continue to strengthen and deepen the energy dependence on one supplier and create and continue the vulnerability that Europe has to that. So
one depends on Russia and the second depends on Kazakhstan.
Azerbaijan, you mean?
Azerbaijan.
I think it's
so here's
more...
1 and 1. I mean, I'm just trying to understand the difference between Azerbaijan and Russia.
I think no country in the world should be dependent for its most basic energy needs on one supplier.
Whether Azerbaijan or Russia.
Absolutely. What we believe is that Russia will continue to be an important and critical supplier into Europe for their supplies. However, countries should not be 100% dependent. Not in Europe, not in Central America, not in Asia, and not in the Middle East. And therefore, what does that mean? That means that you bring in other resources, create competition, create diversification. The best way to achieve security in Eastern and Central Europe is through diversification of supplies and the routes. So that means building an ambitious project such as a pipeline from Azerbaijan through Georgia, through all of Turkey, into Greece, through Albania, into Italy, with connection points into Bulgaria and onwards. But it's not only that. It's not only Azerbaijani gas. It's also allowing for LNG gas from Greece to come into Europe from Croatia. That means American gas, it means Norwegian gas, it means Qatari gas, it means Egyptian gas, can all come in to Europe. Right now, that option does not exist. It's reliance on one supplier, and a supplier that on 3 occasions in the last 10 years has shut off the supply in order to make a political point. So that should be taken away. We have no problem with, nobody has an issue with Russia playing a critical role in the market in Europe. We just don't want them to mess with the market.
Of course. And you think if Greece, after a while, opted for the Azeri, let me call it the Azeri option, would that mean that immediately Greece would get out of its economic dilemma?
I don't think there's any magic bullets on any issue, definitely not on this one. But I don't think this is really a choice issue. I think that Greece is already committed to the southern corridor. It's a partner in it. It has never walked away from that, and it continues to support the Trans-Adriatic pipeline. And that's a good thing. And that's good for Greece and good for Europe. And it's going to create a tremendous amount of jobs in the short run in Greece and allow it to be that connective tissue between different regions, from Azerbaijan and Turkey and the Caucasus and the Caspian and Europe. And I think that's also to the benefit of Europe, to the benefit of Greece, and to the benefit of the world economy.
Why is the United States interested in this? I mean, this is a connection between a group of partners somewhere between Asia and Europe. And why is the United States interested, to the extent that the piece of news I have in front of me is the US is urging Greece to drop the idea of hosting a controversial Russian pipeline project? I mean, why that much interest?
Energy security.
For the welfare of the world, or?
Well, I think that energy security, just like here when I said about Egypt, that energy security is economic security, is national security. That's not true only about Egypt, that's true everywhere. And since we are committed to Europe's national security, and economic security is part of national security, and fundamental to that is energy security, it is a key component of our alliance and cooperation with Europe. And we work very closely with Brussels. We have something that we call the US-EU Energy Council, where we discuss these issues. And so we care deeply about the energy security of Europe, but not only of Europe. This happens to be something that gets a lot of headlines. But this is my fifth or sixth trip here in Egypt. I travel around the world because we care about this issue everywhere. And because it's fundamental to national security concerns to us. And that's why we see it. It doesn't enrich us. There are no American companies involved in these projects. Yeah. And yet we care because it's the right thing.
Well, if you ever meet with President Obama, tell him I'm congratulating him on his choice for you as a special envoy, because I think you're doing an excellent job, and I'm very grateful for the time you've offered us here on the channel.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.